Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is July 21st, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? I'll quickly get back to the map, but first I wanted to talk about very important news today, and that is the terrorist Igor Girkin was arrested by President Putin, and we know that it was on Putin's order. So obviously we know why. Putin has been purging everybody that's been criticizing him, especially after Prigozhin's little mutiny that didn't work out. And so now Putin is just detaining everybody that is voicing a negative opinion against his regime and the way that this war is happening. So it's surprising that it took such a long time because, Sirokov has been saying the same things for the past year at a minimum. And what isn't surprising that obviously he is now, detained. I think that most of us kind of expected that to happen. But not as quickly as I thought it would be, right? We're a year in and now he's officially being detained. So this is good news for Ukraine. The main reason is that because Putin just doesn't have the option anymore of putting competent people in charge. He realizes that when he puts people that are competent, they're most likely ambitious. And they're also people that are realistic and they see things thoroughly, right? So he'd rather sacrifice competent people in his regime that are capable of, doing the right thing, making the system work, even within the military. He'd rather sacrifice that to have loyal people that are just a bunch of yes men. And so this is going to play a positive, it's going to be positive for the Ukrainian forces because as you've seen, Shoigu being, the general, the commander of the Russian forces, he has no experience as a military commander. And he's one of the reasons why this Russian invasion went so terribly wrong for Russia. But Putin knows that he's a yes man, that he's loyal, and that he's not going to change allegiances or scheme against Putin. It's very unlikely. Whereas people like Surovikin, like Prigozhin, like Igor Girkin, Popov, and many other generals that were realistic and very competent, or at least somewhat competent, started voicing negativity, and they were automatically either detained or removed from their posts. So this plays a very, very positive impact. It has a positive impact on the Ukrainian forces. So that's good. And as you can see here, he's already been showed up in court under charges of extremist activity. So, of course, right, Igor Girkin met his fate. And I think it's a good thing. He's a terrorist. He's one of the main agents that started this whole thing, this whole war in Ukraine, right? The proxy war in Donbass, the Crimean annexation, and shut down the MH17 and killed hundreds of innocent Dutch and other international civilians that had nothing to do with this. So I'm very happy for him. He met, he's in the right spot today. And the other thing I wanted to talk about on the map is we also have news that, with Prigozhin being kind of pushed away from Russia and now in Belarus officially training the Belarusian army with Wagner, they are conducting a lot of operations close to Poland, so close to, I think, the city of Brest. And essentially, this is very worrisome for the Polish government and the Polish army. So they have mobilized or they've pushed a lot of its forces close to the border as a show of force to display that Belarus just doesn't get to have these little, training operations literally by the border. We've already seen that happen, in February 2022, and how that ended up being a full-scale invasion in Ukraine. And even if I think that this is obviously just a show, you can never be careful enough. I think that if anything, the February 2022 moment really taught us to be very diligent and careful and always expecting the worst, especially when it has to do with Belarus and Russia. And so now Putin came out today very, very aggressive, surprisingly, saying that, look, the West is trying, he's doing a show of aggression. Look at them, we will protect Belarus at all costs. Buddy, you don't have an army anymore. And you're having trouble even taking a few kilometers, 12 kilometers in Ukraine. You really think that you're going to change the game in Belarus? I seriously doubt it. So, it's again little Putin, trying to look big, but it's just a bunch of talk. And I seriously doubt that Russia or Belarus will do anything to sway Poland. Poland is a major powerhouse in terms of its military. It invested heavily, especially since the war started in Ukraine. They got new K2 self-propelled howitzers. They're going to get M1 Abrams tanks. They really are modernizing. It's an army that is, compared to the Russian army, it's night and day. So I'm really not worried about, Poland not being able to hold the line if anything was to happen. Poland has it together. So that's just a little update in terms of what's going on in Belarus. And in terms of the map update in Ukraine, there haven't been that many changes. Things are slow this week. The Ukrainians, again, are trying to preserve lives. They're not going to throw a bunch of units into certain death. So, of course, the Zaporizhia, Donbass front line is difficult for the Ukrainians. But in my next slide, I'll talk about the cluster munitions. They've officially arrived. We've seen some videos this week, so I'll talk about how effective they are. And obviously, we need to keep a watch on the Russian sort of offensive that they're trying to do in the north, close to Kharkiv. You can see already that Deep State updated the map within Kupiansk. The Russians are trying to do push here. So far, not successful. According to many sources, the Russians have not moved the line. And the same thing with Svatove and Kremina. If there is some movements, they're very small. So the Ukrainians are holding their line. And I think that the cluster munitions are definitely having a good impact here because their kill rate or their effective kill rate area is far greater than a conventional shell would be able to do. So this is very positive here in terms of the Ukrainians holding the line because we need them to do so that the Russians don't have a momentum in the north. So I'll keep you guys updated in terms of Bakhmut and Zaporizhia and Kherson as well as soon as there's new developments within Ukrainian advancements and also the Ukrainian defenses. Now, let's go to the next slide, which was about cluster munitions. So officially, I've seen a video this week of the Ukrainian forces using these cluster munitions against a relatively small Russian squad somewhere in Donbass. And boy, was it effective. It completely wiped them out. They were completely gone. So this is positive, and I don't think any of us should be feeling bad that the Ukrainians are using them because the Russians have been using these cluster munitions ever since the war started against civilian targets. So I think that it's only right that the Ukrainians are using them against well-entrenched Russian positions, which are difficult to clear out, and cluster munitions are the answer for that. And they're also the answer to also demine these saturated minefields made by the Russians. So I think that this is really important, and we're already getting confirmation from the White House spokesman John Kirby saying that they're using them, the Ukrainian forces are using them appropriately. They're actually having a positive impact for the Ukrainian soldiers, the Ukrainian army, and the Russians' defensive formations and Russia's defensive maneuvering is being impacted by them. Also intercepted messages from Twitter indicate that the Russians are having a major psychological breakdown, because at the moment, the armed forces of Ukraine are demolishing their positions in the Bakhmut direction with cluster munitions. The counter-battery fire does not work on Russia's side. Everything is burning all around. They don't have any aviation support, and the only thing that remains is to believe in themselves. So that's all they have. And of course, there's no aviation because their jet fighters are also falling from the sky on a weekly basis, so they can't even rely on their own air force to defend them. So this is very positive, and I think that as of next couple of weeks, we should start seeing a lot more of these cluster munition videos being used on Russian targets. And I think that they're going to have a very good impact in terms of clearing out these very saturated minefields and saturated trenches full of Russian soldiers. So I'll keep you guys updated in terms of that. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is Russian propaganda and why, yet again, I always want to remind my audience that the Russian people cannot be swayed against this war. It's just, there is a line that they've crossed, and I think this article really presents one of the reasons why very well. So this is a man, great article, very long, so I didn't obviously code the entire article, but there's some interesting parts here. So he watched Russian television for 5 days straight. So his full immersion in Putin's propaganda. And so it starts with Russians have been preparing for the bloodshed of innocent Ukrainians as far back as 2014, if not earlier. The images of Ukrainians as a bunch of Nazis hoodwinked by the West were readily presented on Russian television. And even I remember after, the Maidan Revolution and the Donbass proxy war started in May 2014, April, May 2014, Russian propaganda channels started pumping out ridiculous stories that the Ukrainians were crucifying Russian-speaking boys in Donbass, and, they were killing innocent civilians in villages, and that they were burning down, teachers that were also teaching Russian, just ridiculous stories like that. And so the Russians were already swallowing all these stories, believing that the Ukrainians were a bunch of Nazis killing just for fun the Russian people. So on NTV, another staple of Russian television appears, the dysfunctional family showcase. They beat me, tied up my hands, starved me, a woman from Volgograd cries. My grandmother beat my face with a metal stick. The beaten woman, now in the middle age, is the daughter of a mother of 5 who rejected all or most of her children after giving birth to them. The elderly mother who abandoned her children is presented. A woman with a piece of jewelry around her neck resembling a thick chain screams from the audience, "Why did you give birth to so many children if you don't have a husband or money so that they would be orphans?" The old woman crawls on the floor. Forgive me," she cries to her children. Now we have left the pages of Chekhov and arrived in Dostoevsky land. Some of the audience is in tears. My fate has been so difficult, the old mother cries out to them and to her many abandoned children. So again, that displays to you already that it's a recurrent theme, to be very honest with you, within Eastern Europe. Ukraine, Belarus, and even post-Soviet blocs countries have had their issues with very dysfunctional families due to the communism and the yoke of the communist, regime. And, it's not just something that is unique in Russia. But what differentiates the Ukrainian people to the Russian people is that the Ukrainians want to change that. They want to have Western values where families are functional, where the state supports families, where the state will somewhat give services to these families so they can live a better life, right? A more easy life without having all of these dysfunctional parents that were either alcoholics, who abandoned their kids. And this is extremely frequent, right? This is not just some unique story. And the Russians love watching that, right? Because they can kind of tie some of their stories to that story as well, right? This is a very frequent thing, right? Deadbeat fathers that are just not there for their kids. They're either alcoholics or on drugs, or they just abandon their children, just poor role models. And I think that the rate is far higher in Russia than compared to other countries. I don't have statistics, but I would definitely believe that this is the case based on anecdotal stories that I've seen and heard. So then it continues on with, it's the weekend, and Channel 1 is showing an endless run of old Soviet movies and army choirs singing about the glory of the Soviet Union. But NTV is cueing younger with a show about women being stalked by ex-lovers. He's a professional boxer, and he punched me several times. A woman says of her former boyfriend, he has a very aggressive nature. A model is being blackmailed over videos by her ex. Smartphones have made stalking very easy, the announcer intones. He threatened to knock out my teeth, another woman says, and we're treated to an array of horrifying bruises. The program knows that stalking of exes by spring lovers is also a problem in the United States and Germany as well. Fair enough, this happens everywhere. But I can definitely confirm that this is happening far more often in Russia compared to other countries. This may be true, but after watching Russian television for less than 24 hours, I'm starting to see a through line here, which is the consistent presence of violence in Russian shows, usually committed against women and children. The verb meaning to hit comes up constantly, which makes sense in a country where men encounter horrific hazing in the military, as well as a cruel and violent penal system. And that's not just, the military or the prison system or the justice system that is brutal. It's also just the daily life for men in Russia. Already that their life expectancy is far smaller, shorter compared to, the G8 countries or just developed countries. And I think men on average live like not even by 60 now in Russia. Alcoholism rates are the highest. There's also the fact that the opportunities in smaller Russian communities are just so small that most of these men then end up being tied with criminal activities. And even when they were kids, most likely they were being bullied. The school system is also very rough in Russia. And so all these things take into, play a huge role as to why these men, we see them being extremely brutal against Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilians, right? We've seen these stories in Bucha, Irpin, Kherson, right? Locking out people, torturing them, killing them, and just doing horrific things against innocent people. And they were enjoying that because this is what the Russian society breeds, is this just horrific childhood that most of these kids have to live through. And also it points out that in 2017, the Duma even passed a law decriminalizing domestic abuse that does not result in the victim being treated in a hospital. And I even saw a video, I think last week, of a Russian soldier coming back home from the war and just literally in broad daylight in front of people walking in the streets beating up his wife, right? And nobody was doing a single thing about it. They were just watching this poor woman just being beat up by the Russian soldier. And everybody was just, going about their day, ignoring completely the fact that this man is literally almost killing this poor woman. The last thing I want to talk is this last paragraph, 2 paragraphs. So as the day continues, NTV presents a documentary entitled I Was Zelensky's Filth. A young imprisoned woman is accused of trying to bomb Mariupol's city hall after the battered city held a sham election in favor of joining Russia. Mariupol is a place of glory for Russian forces and shame for the Kiev Führer, the announcer declares. That Führer, of course, is none other than Ukraine President Zelensky. The show visits the apartment of the supposed woman terrorist, which is hilariously staged with an American flag and Nazi memorabilia. Can Sasha from Samara possibly believe this nonsense? Of course he will. Then the program breaks for a commercial for Prostricom 100, another erectile dysfunction supplement. The bottle seems to feature the drawing of a prostate. Meanwhile, on Russian One News, we learn that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has fully committed himself to America. Germany can deal with the rising price of energy. The Greens are to blame. Germany will become the next Kenya. So you guys see that another recurring theme within Russian propaganda is always showcasing how terrible the West has it, right? And that, it's not good in Russia. You can see that sometimes they can open the tap and kind of showcasing the reality of Russia within their propaganda channels, but they're always showing how much worse it is in Europe. Look at these people, they're freezing to death in the winter. Look, they have to resort to eating crickets and insects because they don't have enough food. Look, Germany literally is going to become Kenya soon because they don't have enough gas and energy supply. Look at the United States, it's breaking down, Biden, and just constantly referring to how the West is crumbling and we have it better in Russia, so be grateful. That's the type of narrative that exists in Russia, and that's why it's not surprising, after everything I've mentioned to you guys, that after decades of this type of brainwashing that the Russians have been watching for decades, right? They've been glued to these televisions for so many years that it's just this cassette that's in their head, right? It just can't be overwritten. They truly believe that Russia is the greatest country. There's nobody that can prove them otherwise. And even if they were to go abroad in Europe and to see the reality of how much better people live, there's going to be cognitive dissonance. They might be witnessing how clean, how well developed Germany might be, or France. But they're still going to be telling in their heads, in Russia it's better. It's so much better. I love my little village and my izba that's slowly breaking down, but it's so much better than, France or Germany or Italy. There's no denying that, right? This cognitive dissonance is very present within Russian society, and I think that there's just no hope for the regular Russian person to rise against the Putin regime. The only situation where a coup could happen is, as we saw with Prigozhin, or Russian elites getting together and having enough and saying, we just can't win this war. We're losing too much. We need to remove Putin. But then again, there's a huge question mark. Is that going to happen? Especially with Putin cracking down even more, trying to remove anyone that is going to be, voicing a negative opinion against him. So I don't have any hope. So the only hope now is for Ukraine to win this war against Russia and crumble this absolute tumor that is the Russian regime, right? It's a tumor growing on all the Russian people. And they can't remove it because it's so present everywhere they go. They cannot trust, they're oppressed, and they're being, fed this garbage on a daily basis. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I really am so grateful for all of you guys. Your comments are great. You have so much knowledge. I always love reading them. I don't have time to respond to all of them, but I try to read as many comments as possible. I'm super grateful for you guys and your support for this channel, your support for Ukraine. And I really believe in Ukraine victory. That's why I continue making these videos. And you guys give me the energy as well to continue making these videos and showing you the unbiased truth, right? Not only about Russia, but also Ukraine. Things are not perfect on both sides either. So I digress. Thank you so much for watching my video. Subscribe to my channel if you enjoy it. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you and take care. Bye.